I'm Chip Hanna, and this is the For You Leaders podcast featuring Kirk Dando. Family in the business. It's a tough issue that seems to be emotionally charged. There are a ton of benefits to having family in the business, but also some negative ones. Continuing our conversation today is Rocky Turner, CEO of LPR Construction.
You might remember Rocky from a previous episode. He epitomizes what I call a For You leader. And I explain a bit more about what that means. If you listen to the previous podcast, you'll know what I'm talking about. If you haven't, I'm going to encourage you to go back and listen to it. There's some powerful teachings and learnings in there. Rocky is first a great friend of mine, but he's also an exceptional CEO and leader. In case you haven't heard of LPR Construction, they're one of the largest steel erection and heavy industrial construction companies in the United States. They've worked all over the United States and some projects outside of, a lot of stadiums, some of those you might have visited.
America West Arena, we did the Florida Panthers and then the Miami Heat. I think the next big project we did was the Denver Art Museum. Yeah, we did the Miami Marlins baseball stadium. Right now we're doing the Atlanta Braves baseball stadium. Just this past year, we did our first venture up into Canada and did the Edmonton Oilers arenas.
Rocky has some interesting theories when it comes to having family in the business. However, that was not always the case. One of his original co-founders really didn't believe in having family in the business, so for a long time they didn't. However, today that's different.
I have all three of my sons working in the business.
So, when does family in the business really work? And when does it really not work? And really, how does loyalty and bloodlines play into it?
Hey, didn't you also get the chance to ask him what you were originally hired to do?
Yeah, I did. It's kind of an ongoing funny story. There's some insight that you'll learn from his answer about what it looks like to work with me. At the root of it is, when I was an executive and we were growing our organization, I always could find, advisors and consultants and even people on my team that would kind of tell me what I wanted to hear. But I rarely found people that would listen carefully enough to tell me what I needed to hear. So his response will give you some insight into that. Let's listen into the rest of our conversation with Rocky. One of the things that Pete Carner, who's one of your founders, has retired since then, you guys had an unwritten, or maybe it was written, I don't know, philosophy that no family in the business. And I think it was maybe, Pete explained it to me is because I think he'd had some experiences where it wasn't super positive with family, not in this business, maybe I think it was in another business. But anyways, after Pete retired, family members, not just your family members, but several key people that have had a significant impact on LPR started having family members show up in the business. And I think it's one of the things that a lot of people out there that are listening to this that have family-run businesses would be curious to know kind of what are some of your philosophies around bringing family members into the business, accountability, all those different things tied to that.
Pete's experience with family in the business was, well, in the beginning, he was in business with his father, and I think it was a very contentious relationship, and I think it was, I'm not sure what all the problems were. I think Pete was kind of young and wild, and for whatever reason had a falling out with his father, and it left a bad taste in his mouth. And then Larry worked for a man whose son was involved in the business, and his wife was as well. And I think the son in particular, if he hadn't been the guy's son, he would have gotten fired and should have gotten fired. So that just left a bad taste in their mouth. And when my sons came, I have all three of my sons working in the business. When they came into the business, I told them that they need to work harder than anybody else, and they need to make sure that they're being a true asset to the company. And we have many instances within the company where sons, daughters, husbands, wives are working in the business, and it can be a real plus for the business, people that travel. Sometimes if the husband's working for the company or the wife's working for the company and you bring the spouse on, it doesn't work out. But you have to be willing to, if it's not working out, move on and get them out of the business. But if it is working, then it can be a really great thing for everybody involved. It's hard in this business to travel, But if you can travel with your spouse, it makes it a lot easier. So, and then you have a lot of loyalty. I've got, the LPR has a lot of friends of my sons working in the business, and they're key players. It can be, there's a lot of loyalty with family. And if my kids weren't working, then I'd have to be the first to say so and move them out. But it can work if you hold them accountable as you would anybody else.
Yeah, a couple key things. I know that as your kids or other family members have come into the business, they played a role, and they either worked in the field, they learned the business from the ground up. Whatever it was, is there was no entitlement. That's
true. They started out when they were in college, working summers in the field at the lowest levels, and I think that's really important that they earn their stripes and learn the business from the bottom up. So that's a good point.
Did you ever have situations where they would try to catch you on family dinner or something like that and try to bend your ear and get you to lean one way, or did they kind of know not to go there?
It's interesting. We, especially early on, didn't talk business at home. Every once in a while, they'd talk to their mother, and then I'd hear something. But you're having family in the business can give you some insights to, you hear that things are happening, and you think, wow, are we really doing that? And so that has been helpful. And there was a time early on where one of my sons was having trouble with the general foreman that he was working for, and he was pretty unhappy with it. So we had some times, I spent some time with him kind of coaching him on how he ought to deal with the guy. And neither one of them were all wrong, but I think the field manager was a drill sergeant type that maybe, I think, in retrospect, the issues my son had with the guy were pretty well founded, and the guy was probably not a good fit for the company just because of the way he managed. And so I think he might have been driving people away just because of his management style. So, but it was a good experience for my son to kind of stand up to him and kind of do a little reverse managing. Manage your manager. If you're not happy with what your manager's doing, then if you're a good subordinate, you can get in there and manage him to do better.
What's that son doing in the business today?
He's the president of the company, and he's doing well.
He's doing very well. I would say I would attribute it not because he's your son is why he's the president. It's because he's got the ability to do the job is why he's the president. And it's a subtle but significant difference. And I think it's those lessons along the way that made him prepared. In fact, he stepped out of the business. I think each of your sons have stepped out of the business and went somewhere else and worked for a while.
Yeah, that's true. Linc in particular, at some point said that he was going to go a different direction because he felt like, anything he got, people were going to feel like it was because he was my son and he wanted to do something on his own. But then he did that for a while and thought, boy, there's a lot of opportunity here. I think I'll come back. So he's a smart guy.
He is very smart. That's very true. All your kids are. They're special people for sure. One of the things that you said in there that I want to highlight is, it doesn't always work out. And when it does, you have to make the hard decision and not sit and just kind of stare at it for too long. But, so oftentimes I think people they have a bad situation, and so therefore everything's bad. And that's not necessarily true. You've seen a lot of the goodness in it. You're willing to take the risk. And when it doesn't work out, make that decision. Once again, that's going back to that 4U leader. I think that being a 4U leader doesn't mean that you're soft and that you just kind of give everybody kind of what they want and you just, lay the road out for them. Sometimes it is having that hard decisions. And I'm sure I know there's been lots of times where you've had to help somebody that was kind of stuck in the mud in their career and their behaviors or whatever, and have that hard conversation to get them unstuck. And it would have been easy to have shown them the door, but instead you kind of had a very transparent, honest, trusting conversation with them. I can think some of those people right now that are absolute top performers that at one time were, there's a lot of reasons to have shown them the door. Talk about kind of a little bit about that process for you.
Well, one of my strengths and weaknesses, and sometimes it's hard to know where the middle ground is that I am loyal to people, and I work to try to help people through tough times and maybe become better. And you're right. There are examples of people that, have had personal problems, maybe with drugs or alcohol, or that another company or leader might have pushed them out. But we gave them an opportunity to, called them on their behavior and gave them an opportunity to change and get past their problems. And it's been, they are great assets for the company. And there have been other times when you've waited too long, when you finally do show somebody the door, and you get people coming in and thanking you, and that's so that's when maybe an example of waiting too long. But it is a people business, and as long I'm loyal to people as long as I feel like they're trying to get better. I feel strongly that people need to be loyal to the company and loyal to me as a leader, and if they're not being that, then those are pretty easy decisions. Although I feel like I've taken too long sometimes to show people the door, but in other times it's worked out. So there's no right or wrong way. I think it's just you have to just try to make the best decision you can at the time.
Yeah, no, I think you're exactly right. There's not a science. There's a script that tells you which way, but I think that you have consistently made the decision to stick with somebody longer, which I think has served the company real well. I think that's part of that trust that you've earned, that benefit of the doubt that you've earned over time. I think that talk about for you leaders are people that want to know who you are. They care about what matters to you. They want to know where you're at in that journey. And sometimes that journey is you are stuck in the mud. You know, whether it be drug, alcohol, behavioral, life happens. It's tough. It's not just where you're at in this success journey, but it's just where you're at in life. And then how can I help you take that next step? Sometimes it's helping people move into a role like Linc has done, into the president role, something that he's never done, and helping him grow. And sometimes it's helping somebody, just giving them the opportunity to help themselves, but it's just helping them take that next step. It's not doing it all for them. And I think that that's something that, once again, has not been a script for you, but I think it's something that you have kind of followed as a path. You truly do care about who people are. You truly care about where they're at, and you are always trying to help them take that next step. What or who has had the most significant influence on shaping you as a leader?
Kirk Dando.
Here's your $100. Okay, now for the real answer.
Before you said, you asked who might have had the most influence on me as I've been on this journey, and I do think it's important to mention Pete Carner. He and I had a 27-year partnership, and he had, I think of our relationship and that partnership almost like a marriage. We had our ups and downs, and at one point nearly split up, and for a while he left the company for about 6 months. But during that time, I realized he did have strengths, and our model was that with tough decisions, if we didn't both agree that we ought to do something or make a change, then we wouldn't. And he helped shape the direction and lead the company. He was kind of always in the background, like, helping me and with the tough decisions and shaping the direction of the company.
Well, I owe a personal debt of gratitude to Pete, because he's the one that introduced me into LPR.
Well, that's true. He dragged you in here, and I go, what do we need that guy for? And it's the truth. But
yeah. I think he decided I was fun to hang out with because we met playing golf. So along those lines, we worked together for a long, long time. Can you remember the original reasons why you guys brought me in?
Yes. You were going to help us get cash flow, figure out our cash flow projection.
And did we ever do that?
No, we never did. Yeah, and I've watched you evolve, and that's been the fun things. You've always worked on what it is you want to be and how you want to help influence businesses. And you've grown, and as you've grown, you certainly helped us.
So what are some of the things that have surprised you about the work that we've done as far as insights or outcomes?
Well, I think you've always pushed us to learn how to keep score and understand the business indicators that we need to watch and get us to a 30,000-foot view of what's going on in the business and be able to, as you say, predict problems rather than just put out fires and solve problems.
One of the things that we've been working on we've actually worked on it for several years. Each year it's evolved, but talk a little bit about just the strategy process and what I call the management framework, which is the trifold that we're working on. It's kind of getting the signal strength down and throughout the organization, the communication of that. Talk about a little bit about that process and how you've seen it help or the struggles with it.
Well, I think you can, as we've done strategic planning over the years, it's pretty easy to come up with the 300 top things you need to work on. And in that process, you get bogged down with so many projects that you don't do any of them justice. But I think you've helped us, boil it down to what are the few things we want to tackle at any given time. And so I think that's important. Don't try to make the right changes and don't try to make too many changes at one time.
Well, Rocky, I really appreciate you taking time to share your insights. I could go all day, keep asking questions because I learned something by listening to you talk. I think that I learn a lot by just watching you and how you behave and how you handle people. I know that personally, I think you're one of the most dependable people I know. I think that's a critical characteristic of a leader is somebody that's dependable, somebody that has a life worth following and has a following. So thank you for your time today. Again, thank you for your friendship.
Well, right back at you. Thank you for your friendship, and it's been fun to reminisce a little bit and talk about the journey. But you've certainly been instrumental in the success of LPR and helping us to over the years make tough decisions. I know that Pete and I both leaned on you when it can be really lonely and to try to have you and in the background coaching, helping us really make tough decisions.
There you have it. Some of this stuff is overly obvious and embarrassingly simple, but none of it's easy. One of my great friends, Rocky Turner, shared some great advice around family in the business, but there's one thing I want you to take away from today's conversation. One common theme or thread that pulled through this with Rocky is he holds people accountable. You can tell Rocky's not a jerk. He's not mean-spirited. He doesn't have unrealistic expectations, but he does hold people in his organization accountable for doing what they've decided to do. And it really starts with him. He holds himself to a high level of accountability, his family, and everyone else. When family's involved, he holds them extra accountable. So what does this look like in your organization? Whether it's a family member, someone that you treat like a family member, or someone that's on your team. What does this look like? I want to let you know we've got some other great leaders coming up on this podcast. We've got some CEOs that have started multiple companies and grown them into billion-dollar companies. We're going to get advice and guidance from them. One of my good friends, Brett Hurt. We're going to sit down and interview him. He's one of those folks. We're going to be talking to some people that are first-time CEOs and what that journey looks like and everything in between. Be sure and listen in next time to the For You Leader podcast. And make sure and subscribe to the For You Leader podcast at foryouleaders.com.